Thanks, Kim. And I'll try to keep this quick so we can get back on track with the time and everything. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about sagebrush ecology, how it relates to fire, and what you might do um, to mitigate climate change and fire on sagebrush. So the first thing that I kind of want to mention is that there is not just sagebrush. There are many different kinds of sagebrush, and they have completely different ecology. So when you're dealing with sagebrush, it's really important to understand the species or even the subspecies of sagebrush. So here's a good example. At least in the Great Basin, most of the sagebrush is either Artemisia tridentata Wyomingensis, which is on the bottom here. And then higher up in elevation from that is mountain big sagebrush, which is this picture on the top. And so, for example, with mountain big sagebrush, it grows at higher elevations, so there's more soil moisture, and it's actually well adapted to fire. So it's kind of a lower growing shrub, and it's kind of connected with the little grasses in here, and it's got this adaptation where you have these things called birthday candles. So that's its seeds that are kind of up above the biomass. So if there's a fire, its seeds are kind of adapted to just be above the fire so that they can then disperse in the post-fire environment. And so this is a subspecies of sagebrush that historically had shorter fire return intervals. It recovers quickly after fire, and the main problem actually isn't fire; it's juniper encroachment, where conifers and, like, for example, junipers and pinions grow in and kind of take over. And so fire can be a management tool to mitigate that effect. On the other hand, there's the most widespread subspecies of sagebrush is Artemisia tridentata Wyomingensis. And this is more of this grows in lower elevation upland sites. And so you can kind of see here, there's a lot more space in between each shrub. So it's kind of just like big 1 meter tall shrubs with a bunch of space in between. And back in the day, that space in between used to be occupied by bare ground covered in biological soil crust with little perennial bunch grasses and forbs. But more recently, grazing has kind of allowed there to be a lot of cheatgrass invasion that fills in the fuel gaps between each shrub, and that kind of leads to a loss of biodiversity from the repeated fires that eventually happen. So here on the top right here is a plot from a study that we did where we showed repeated fires and their effect on biodiversity. This is what you call a species accumulation curve. So with 0 fires, you have your estimated species pool at like 100 or 150 species, and then as you get repeated fires, your estimated regional species pool is actually has an asymptote around 10 species. So you're just really depleting the biodiversity across the entire region when you have these repeated fires to this plant that is not adapted to fire. And it also has effects on ecosystem services. So this is a plot here where each of these colors is a progressive stage of cheatgrass invasion. And you see the difference in soil nitrogen and carbon in wet and dry years in uninvaded sites versus burned cheatgrass monocultures that typically occur after fires. So yeah, fire is not good in this Wyomingsis system. And so one of the things you can do to preserve these systems is try to preserve the crust where it still exists. So when I say the crust, I mean biological soil crust. So this is a charismatic covering of microorganisms on the soil. And this does a lot of really great things. It holds in soil nutrients, soil moisture, fixes nitrogen, and the like hard surface that it creates on the soil like actually impedes cheatgrass seeds from getting into the soil. And so so it's good to keep the crust. And that's one of the reasons why some people are saying we should minimize grazing on like intact sagebrush sites, because grazing kind of ends up trampling the crust, and then cheatgrass seeds stick to the legs of the cows, and then so they act as a dispersal vector. Yeah, so anyways, just kind of putting it into the resist, accept, direct framework. Just to show you, there's a lot of sites out there that are just beautiful biodiverse sagebrush sites. Like they're still very widespread. There's some beautiful lupins. Here's a site where you can kind of see there's a little bit of cheatgrass invasion, but there's still good crust and perennial grasses throughout most of the site. So this is just a great spot to kind of try to preserve and not totally hammer with grazing, and then and prevent fires in these systems. So, but then there's other areas where it's totally done. Like this is not, there's just like nothing you can really do about it. So like here's a western facing low elevation site where you can see that this is an unburned patch right here within like a many acre patch of just cheatgrass monoculture. And you can see that the combined effects of climate change and the ecohydrological changes that cheatgrass monocultures bring is just pretty much killing all of the sagebrush from drought stress. So this is kind of just like one of those things where you have to just accept that, whatever, this is no longer a sagebrush ecosystem, and it's just waiting for a fire to get rid of all the stems. And this is a nearby area down on the bottom here where we sampled it in June 2016. And it's the same kind of story. You see a lot of this, half the sagebrush almost is dying from drought stress. And then there was a big fire that happened, and it's just completely moonscaped. And then we went back in 2019, and you see where this clipboard is here. This is this little white thing here is our little permanent stake that kind of survived the fire. And you can see it's just like this was literally just two species for like miles and miles and miles. So yeah, so there's a different strategy once it's kind of all over. It's like now it's like you might as well just go ahead and do targeted grazing and try to knock down the tree grass in the spring to maybe reduce the risk of future fire or a fire later in the season. And another thought here is to, in these areas where it's kind of all over, like why not plant like other species of shrubs besides sagebrush, other native shrubs like rabbit brush or other things that can that are prolific resprouters, so that when a fire does occur, they're going to sprout back. And even though it's not providing all the great things that sagebrush provides, at least you're still sequestering some carbon below ground, and all the other, holding in soil moisture, that kind of thing. Another thought is producing drought resistant genotypes of sagebrush, and then different strategies for seeding. People have been talking more recently about doing repeated seedling applications, because right now, like the BLM typically will get funding for like a one-off, aerial seeding attempt, and that's kind of all they get. And then it's just on to the next fire. So if we kind of have more thoughtful strategies for restoration, we might have more success. And that's about it. So thanks.
Awesome.